There's 10 men sitting around a table in the boardroom in their office, each of them sitting there very nervous, fidgeting, looking around the table, not wanting to look at any single person in the eye because they know that something bad is probably going to happen. The vice president walks in charge of operations. He sits down and he looks at each and every one of them. He speaks harshly to them. And then he remembers. He remembers the opportunity and chances that he received. And something astonishing happens. What was expected doesn't. What was deserved is held back. It's a similar scene that we actually find in the book of Genesis at looking at Joseph. My name is Trent Jenkins, and welcome to the Daily Dose. And we're talking about humility today. And as we look at this, I'm thinking of Joseph in this moment of where he is in charge of all the operations of Egypt. He had ended up going to his brothers. He ended up telling them that they would all bow down to them. They sold him into slavery. He goes to Potiphar's house. He becomes the ruler of Potiphar's house, ultimately is betrayed by Potiphar's wife. She tries to seduce him, but then he gets thrown into jail. He says to the cupbearer and to the baker, he predicts their dreams and asks them to remember him, but no, he stays in prison. But then he's remembered by the cupbearer. He's brought out of jail to Pharaoh, predicts the dream, and he ends up setting up Egypt for success amongst the drought. In that moment, Pharaoh gives him all authority over Egypt just under him. Now his brothers come to be able to get food because they're starving to death. This moment, he has the ability of exacting all of his revenge, all of his anger and bitterness for all of the years that he had been abandoned, where he had been a refuge in another country. And this is his moment where he can end up smiting them. He can end up demolishing them. He has all the power, but he decides to do something different. He ends up ultimately getting his father to be able to come back, and he reveals himself to them. It's found in Genesis chapter 45 and verse 7. He says this, in this moment where he reveals himself to his brothers, he says, "But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of all of Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you and your children." And it's amazing to see what takes place over a period of time here, where all of a sudden Joseph, who speaks out of arrogance of how his brothers will bow down to him, now is speaking out of a place of humility, knowing that all that he's achieved is not off of his own ambition and his own abilities, but he says, it is God that has brought me here. It is God who has given me all authority and power. I think in this element of humility, we look at these definitions, and I went to the Webster's dictionary, and it basically said, hey, don't be arrogant, and it's the act of being humble. Oh, well, thank you, Webster. Like, what kind of definition is that, right? Ultimately, though, we look at it, and I was looking for a better definition, and I came upon this Proverbs 22:4. I love this. Humility is the fear of the Lord. It's the fear of the Lord, ultimately. It's ultimately recognizing others have value above us, and we should not think higher of ourselves than we ought. It's looking at other people and using the authority and power that we have in control and empowering them to be able to be lifted up in their own lives. That we use what it is that God has gifted us, recognizing that what we have is a gift from Him and nothing that we've earned or deserved. And then how do we empower? How do we enable other people to be able to achieve more, to become more, to be able to lift others up? Because there's a reality that both you and I have been lifted up by God when we didn't deserve it and we didn't earn it. Today, let's act in humility and treat others higher than they probably deserve, but definitely better than we ought to.